Welcome to the January 27th Global News Review. I'm Patrick Ryan, President of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. With me today are Ambassador Dick Bowers and Dr. Breck Walker. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Breck.
Good to see you all.
Morning. Good afternoon.
I trust that everyone is safe and sound and staying away from bugs and things out there.
I'm 2 days away from getting my second COVID shot.
Second one.
Second one. Something to be said for being an old guy. You get in line, right?
Yeah, and you can take a nap in the afternoon. So I guess.
Well, I got to get it in the afternoon, so I got to get up sometime.
Oh, okay. Well,
anyway.
let's jump right in here. We got a lot to cover, and we want to talk about a few things in the news today. Our review of topics in the news. Ambassador Bowers, you want to tell us what
we're gonna do our usual.
We have going for us today.
Our usual trifecta here. First is kind of reviewing U.S. global engagement. What's going on in the world? Secondly, the doomsday clock and banning nuclear weapons. A new treaty takes effect. And third, Navalny's jailed and the Russians take to the streets. What's happening in Putin's Russia?
Well, yeah, there's trouble in the streets, and we'll get into that with Breck. But first, Breck is going to walk us through the question of the week, taken from our weekly quiz.
I am Pat. We have a really tough one today, so we'll see what we'll see how people do on it. But the question of the week is: President Biden signed a letter on his first day in office to the UN Secretary General, signaling America's rejoining of this agreement that bound over 200 countries to global goals combating an existential threat. And the possible answers are A, the New START Nuclear Threat Reduction Treaty, B, the Paris Climate Accord, C, the Joint Comprehensive Ban of Action Nuclear Agreement, and D, the Muslim travel ban. And the answer will come at the end of the program.
Terrific. All right, we're going to start with renewing global engagement. And Dick, I'll just introduce this by saying that we all took a look at an article by George Ingram, who is a friend of the World Affairs Council. He was here in Nashville as a distinguished visiting speaker program guest of ours. And he is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and wrote a piece called "Renewing U.S. Global Engagement in a Changed World." And with the change of administrations, it's probably a good time to take a look at what he had to share on his perspective. And he's a longtime decision maker, policy maker, legislative assistant in Washington. So he's got a lot of experience in U.S. foreign policy, and he's got a thoughtful piece on Brookings. So take a look at that.
Before we jump into that, let me just make a few comments. And actually, Breck, I'm going to give away this answer to your question.
Okay.
So get ready. You can mute your earphones or whatever.
I got my pen ready, yeah.
So our new president, Mr. Biden, has been in office for 1 week and 2 hours and 5 minutes, I guess. But he has been a very busy man, not only domestically, but in the international arena. I mean, and one of the first things he did, Breck, was he sent notice to the UN that the U.S. wants to return to what?
The Climate Accord, the Paris Climate Treaty.
The Paris Climate Accord, that's exactly right. And he also told the WHO, the World Health Organization, that the U.S. wants to rejoin and will be getting back in there. And then we also want to participate in the worldwide COVID-19 vaccine effort. And he told the Russians that we want to start a reboot of New START. So this is the nuclear cap on weapons, on deployed strategic nuclear warheads. And it limits each side to 1,550, which is a real 2/3 down from what the original START treaty mentioned. And the part of the good thing about this is the mechanism to renew the agreement for 5 more years is built into the treaty, so it does not have to be ratified by the US Senate. He also at the same time ordered an intelligence review on what the Russians have been up to, in particular the Russian hack of many of our internet and communication systems. And he lifted the so-called Muslim travel ban that Trump had imposed against citizens of countries like Iran and Iraq and Libya and Somalia. And he has been very busy getting his foreign affairs team into place. So the Senate has confirmed Tony Blinken as the Secretary of State, Avril Haines as the Director of National Intelligence, retired 4-star Army General Lloyd Austin as Secretary of Defense. Janet Yellen has domestic duties as well, but she is also Treasury involved in international affairs, and she's been approved as Secretary of Treasury. And so he has a quality team taken up at the NSC, and he's got a seasoned Foreign Service officer named Bill Burns to run the CIA. Former Secretary of State John Kerry will be Biden's climate czar, and Samantha Power, who was our ambassador to the UN, will take over as the head of USAID. And there's a lady whom I knew in the State Department named Wendy Sherman, who will be the number 2 person at state, and she was the lead negotiator for the Iran nuclear deal. So all these folks are seasoned internationalists, and Biden is packing his foreign affairs team with real pros. So the president is making a number of phone calls as well, reaching out to leaders of other countries, including Russia's Putin, where he raised the massive cyber attack against US communications capabilities, the suspected poisoning of Russian opposition leader Navalny that Breck's going to talk about, and interference in our elections, among other things. He's talked on the phone to a number of leaders, including Germany's Angela Merkel and Macron in France, and Boris Johnson in the UK, and Trudeau in Canada, and AMLO, as he's called, the president of Mexico. So he's reaching out quite a bit. And he's also spent some time on the phone with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and signaled strong US support for NATO, much different than the previous president. And over in Asia, several days ago, Biden dispatched a US carrier strike force to the South China Sea to show US resolve in keeping those strategic waterways open to free navigation. And I'll bet you're missing not being on board that carrier, Patrick, as an old Navy guy, heading off to see what's going on. So Mr. Biden, President Biden, has been an extremely busy man, and I am personally think he's off to a very good start, and I expect we'll see more of the same. Now, Patrick, you want to talk about your article?
Yes, let's dip into the Ingram piece a little bit, and we'll get to some of the slides here. I think that we really need to be watching where and in what ways the new administration engages overseas. You know, you mentioned, Dick, that a lot of the players have been in various positions before. Blinken's been in the State Department. Obviously, Wendy Sherman is a career diplomat. Samantha Power and the others. So you wonder, is it going to be more of the same from before, or is this going to be new creative leadership in dealing with what is really a different world than it was 4, 8, 12 years ago, back when the Obama administration came in and when some of these
I think that's a very valid point. That the world is not the same as it was 8 years ago, and the U.S. is going. I think, while most of the world and all of our friends are welcoming back the United States back to the international arena and become a key player, It's not what it was 8 or 10 years ago. The world has changed. One of the key elements I think the U.S. is going to have to really work on is establishing and reestablishing trust. Can the other countries of the world who rely on the United States really rely on the United States, or do they need to hedge their bets because who knows what's going to happen 4 years ago, and the United States may do another 180 turn and they'll be left high and dry.
Right, that's the great unknown. But Ingram, he talks about some of the elements of getting engaged in the world, and he makes the point about soft power, values and results, and American leadership, and that what helped us prevail in the Cold War was leadership, not just raw military power, but using American demonstrated leadership to prevail in the Cold War.
Well, it was also our values, Pat, not just our leadership. It was what
Right.
we stood for and what the world believed we stood for: the rule of law, democratic institutions, peaceful transference of power, all these kinds of things. And the world would look and say and marvel at the United States. And we were indeed kind of a shining city on the hill in the eyes of
Right.
much of the world. And so that is something that now, the storming of the insurrection of our capital, kind of, again, this is going to be calling into play. Well, can you trust the Americans? Are the values, are Americans still what they used to be? Or is the country fundamentally changed and you can't really count on them anymore?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think we have some maintenance to do on the ship of state before we start sailing it into other people's business again, because we would.
That's a neat metaphor there from a Navy guy, huh?
Well, ship of state. That's you guys over there at Foggy Bottom, right?
It's good.
But yeah, we've got some repairs to make here, and Ingram's piece, and I really recommend this to people to take a look at it. It's on the Brookings Institute website at brookings.edu. George Ingram. And he said that besides leadership and our values, another dynamic that the new team is going to have to be mindful of is that it is a change world. The U.S. is no longer a mono power. We are sharing the world. It's a multipolar world. China's rising. We do have great power competitions to be concerned about. The Europeans are happy to see a new administration across the board, with some exceptions, I suppose, in places like Hungary and Turkey. But for the most part, the Europeans are happy to see a transition in administrations. But that doesn't mean the path ahead with the Europeans is not going to be troubled by things like their recent investment agreement with China. There's other issues, trade and investment issues. Trade is always sticky with our European allies. I think it'll be probably a smooth course, resuming unfettered relations with NATO. One of President Biden's first calls was to the General Secretary. So I think the military alliance is probably better off now than it was a month ago.
You're right.
Breck, you're the historian here with the view spanning decades and eons. What does your spidey sense tell you about the transformation in foreign policy from not just the last 4 years, but I agree with Dick that we're in a new world and it's a new path for foreign policy.
You and Dick may think what I'm getting ready to say is a bunch of poppycock, but just to throw it out there.
That's a good setup.
We're all concerned about how divisive American politics has become, and we're pretty well split 50-50. And it's not only opinions or philosophy or political perspective that we're split on. I mean, we are violently split. We are divisive with a capital D. And I guess I'm a little hopeful that the one area that maybe at the margin we can, get a solid majority of Americans behind is American foreign policy. And I'm hopeful about that because the one thing, you know, historically, going back to the 50s and 60s, at least relative to today, American foreign policy has not been greatly politicized. Democrat Republican politicized in any event, and you know the phrase was politics stops at the American shores, and it's increasingly less that way today. But the Biden administration has put real professionals, not politicians, but real professionals in to the diplomatic and national security leadership roles, and those people, in my opinion, at least, are not ideologues. They are people that probably represent, that have goals and objectives that I think most Americans at the broadest level would support. And they're going to be very rational, I think, and measured and professional in how they have American foreign policy unfold, not political so much. And I'm hopeful that on that side, I don't have a lot of hope for in terms of domestic politics, people coming back together, but maybe on the foreign policy side. And if the Biden administration can achieve one big thing, to me, that would be it, to draw a lot of American support for the broad foreign policies they're going to follow. And I think that's a possibility.
Well, I do not think that's poppycock at all. I think you really got something there, Dr. Breck. Makes sense to me. And I think one of the things that the Biden administration is going to do, and the article points out, they're going to have to really carve out enough time to explain why it is in the interest of the American public that we do what we're doing internationally. You know, why should we be trying to take the lead in the administration of COVID vaccines rather than leaving that to China or some other country? So there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm optimistic that this team is going to be able to do a good job. And I agree with you that it should be less divisive than many of the domestic issues that the Biden administration is going to have to take on.
Let me add a footnote about the COVID international scene. I think we're at the point where the conversation is going to be turning towards how the developed world looks at the lesser developed countries in sharing vaccines. There's this COVAX regime that is being largely ignored by even the countries that signed up to it. The U.S. did not sign up to it, and it's basically a UN organized effort, the WHO, as an agency of the UN, to get vaccines to other countries that couldn't develop their own, may have trouble procuring vaccines and the materials that go along with that. And a lot of people are going to be saying, well, let them take care of themselves, and we want to get all the vaccinations we can get here first. But if you look at these mutations that are already happening from Brazil, South Africa, the UK, if we're not careful and helping the rest of the world take care of their most vulnerable, this thing is not going to go away anytime soon.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, this is a worldwide pandemic. This is what I don't understand when, you know, people think you can't build a wall around the United States and say, okay, we're okay. I mean, you've got to do this on a worldwide basis. And the faster we get involved, the better off we're going to be and the world will be, I think.
Well, speaking of COVID and pandemics, let's turn and look at our next topic. Last week we saw the treaty to ban nuclear weapons go into effect. And this morning in Chicago at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, there was an event that every January, the Bulletin tells the world where the world is on the existential threat by using the symbolic image of a clock. And last year it was set to 100 seconds to midnight. And in this morning's event, they talked about some of the progress that was being made in nuclear weapons in terms of the New START agreement being positive and fighting the pandemic, et cetera. And just for those who don't recall what the doomsday clock is about. It's the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has been doing this for I think 75 years, and they have they've developed this symbolic clock, and the furthest it's been from midnight, which is the an existential event affecting human beings on Earth. The furthest it's been is 17 minutes to midnight, and that was right after the end of the Cold War, and it's been inching towards midnight in the intervening years. And we're going to roll a little video here just to show what the clock is about. And bear with me, Dick. You can talk for a minute here while I tee this up.
I was wondering, Dick, you may know, I don't know, when the last time, or has there been a time, I think there has, when the clock ticked backwards, as long as they've been keeping it, that we actually became safer for a period of time. Maybe in the Reagan administration, when all those arms control treaties first came together as the Soviet Union was falling apart. Seems like I remember that, but I'm not sure.
You're right.
Yeah, it has gone backwards. It has been reset further away from midnight. So let's take a look here at the doomsday clock. Okay, well that was that's the bulletin of atomic scientists this morning unveiling the current setting of the clock. And Breck, yes, it has been reset further from midnight over the years. As I mentioned at the end of the Cold War, it was moved back to 17 minutes from a time that was closer to it. and the excuse me, the clock has evolved from being solely looking at the nuclear threat, the existential nuclear threat, to include as you saw in the video there, climate change as an existential threat, and most recently, the threat from biological elements, pandemics. And they have a general category of technology, man-made technology that threatens human existence. And the ideology there is that anything that man has created, man can reverse and control and make it no longer a threat to humanity. So I would suggest that anybody who's interested in digging a little deeper on the doomsday clock and the movement to prevent or mitigate these existential threats. And if you go to the site, thebulletin.org, there are some excellent articles and really tremendous graphics showing the extent of, for example, the stockpiling of nuclear materials, the number of metric tons of fissile material that could be used in nuclear weapons that's just sitting in various countries, hundreds of tons of this stuff that could be used if it was stolen or somehow gotten to terrorists. We could wind up with nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorist groups. Talks about the reduction and proliferation of nuclear weapons. And that turns us to just a quick conversation about the new treaty to ban nuclear weapons. And this was passed in 2017, and it's called the treaty to ban nuclear weapons. And a group called ICANN, and let me share with you a couple more slides here about the treaty. They won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2017 for being a champion of this UN treaty, and it has been circulating for nations to sign up to. And late last year, they reached the required number of nations for the treaty to go into effect. So this past Friday, it was observed that the treaty banning nuclear weapons is now in effect. And as you might imagine, the nuclear power states, nuclear weapon states, are not signatories to it, but there's going to be increasing pressure from those nations that are signatories to get some level of compliance from all nations. So the treaty is designed to prohibit production, testing, acquiring, possessing, or stockpiling nuclear weapons. It also outlaws the transfer of weapons and forbids signatories from allowing any nuclear explosive device to be stationed, installed, or deployed in its territory. So that has implications for NATO. It has implications for our relationships in other parts of the world. And this is the US nuclear issue. But this is a serious development on the front of nuclear weapons prohibitions and reductions.
Pat, do you have a map that shows which countries have signed and ratified?
I probably do. So
No.
you take the floor here for a second.
I just noticed I was looking at one, and then there's I think the only country in Europe that has either signed or ratified that is Switzerland.
Right.
Canada
the NATO
has not.
nations are
Yeah,
the NATO nations are
out of it because the U.S.
so far.
Well, France has weapons, UK has weapons, and we have weapons stashed in a whole lot of places, including probably Germany, Italy, and Turkey. So,
well, and and ironically, I think that this isn't a unanimous view, but I think it's a widely shared view in a historical sense that the advent of nuclear weapons, one of its underlying silver linings was probably they served as a huge deterrent to further world wars after World War II. And things have changed now because you have smaller nations and so-called rogue nations that have the capability and perhaps terrorist groups at some point. So it's a different situation. But I think you can make a pretty good argument that for the last 75 years, nuclear weapons have perhaps been a boon to mankind in terms of limiting, all-out non-nuclear warfare.
That's a good point. I stand corrected about what I said. It looks like Ireland also seems not to have signed or
And
ratified.
is that Austria and
I think it's Switzerland, isn't it?
could be
Oh, it
both
could.
of them. Looks like Austria to
Well,
me.
looks like
Well,
could be.
we'll do a
Your eyes are better than mine.
we'll do a check on that.
That's
So
okay.
so that's the developments in the nuclear ban, and we'll also mention that the doomsday clock considers global warming, climate change, and we are going to start a series of programs on climate change and the impact on the world. It's a global issue, and clearly it's something we need to have more conversation about. So be looking for that in the future. Breck, do you want to jump into speaking of great power competition? We have been observing things happening in Russia with Mr. Navalny, who was poisoned getting on an airplane with the Russian nerve agent Novichok, went to Germany, was in a coma for a while, and is now up and around, and he flew on a plane to Moscow. I don't want to steal your thunder here, but why don't you tell us about Navalny, Mr. Putin, and what's going on in the streets of Russia across the country?
Sure, Pat. So over the last week or 10 days, one guy, and as a matter of fact, the end of last summer for several days, the fellow who's been in the foreign policy related news pages over and over has been this guy, Alexei Navalny. Now, who the heck is this guy? This 44-year-old Russian lawyer, son of a former army officer who attended Yale for a time on a fellowship. Who is this guy? And why is he getting so much press? And Alexei Navalny is a Russian opposition leader and political activist. He has been a very loud and controversial voice for the past decade against corruption in the Putin administration. He's known for his ability to use social media to mobilize protesters. He has over 2 million Twitter followers. He has his own YouTube channel with more than 6 million subscribers where he publishes these really interesting, sarcastic, often humorous, but hard-hitting corruption exposés that are mostly about the wealth that Putin and his cronies have squirreled away here and there. He was a key leader during the protest against Putin back in the elections in 2011 when tens of thousands of Russians hit the street protesting fraud in their election. He ran for mayor of Moscow in 2013 and he lost, but he still, even though he was basically his campaign talks and any kind of publicity was basically banned from state media. There was little or no media coverage of his campaign. He still won 27% of the vote. He tried to run for president in 2018, but was kept off the ballot. And he has, for the past several years, been leading a movement that he calls smart voting to try and elect opposition candidates to oppose Putin and Putin's United Russia Party. And in a phrase that has really caught on among those not supporters of Putin in Russia, he calls the United Russia Party, Putin's party, the quote, party of crooks and thieves. And that's become quite a meme now in Russia. This movement, the smart voting movement, has had some success. In 2019, candidates backed by Navalny won almost half the seats in the Moscow City Council. In regional elections last year, United Russia, Putin's party, lost its majority in councils in 3 major cities. Again, and Navalny had a lot to do that. There are parliamentary elections coming up this September where opposition to Putin will be expressed certainly in the streets and in the ballot box, and Navalny and his movement are very much behind that. He's been detained on numerous occasions by authorities, jailed for this and that, has gone to trial, and more than a couple of instances was convicted of fraud in 2014, but there was such a political a protest uproar about that he later was given a suspended sentence, and his supporters in any event said that was a political prosecution to begin with. The Wall Street Journal has called Navalny, quote, the man that Vladimir Putin fears most. And David Ignatius, who's an op-ed writer for the Washington Post, he wrote in this past week, quote, Alexei Navalny combines two qualities that Russians admire, a mordant sarcasm towards the country's leaders and great personal bravery. Together, they make him the most potent political threat that President Vladimir Putin has ever faced, close quote. And the evidence that this guy is getting under Putin's skin is that Putin ostentatiously never says his name, never says the name Navalny publicly. The state media doesn't either and calls him from time to time an unimportant blogger. So why is Putin worried about this person that, again, the state media calls a small-time blogger? Well, I think that Putin worries that Navalny just might spark a color revolution, that a mass movement that Navalny rises up could overthrow the Putin regime, such as occurred in Georgia with the Rose Revolution in 2003, such as occurred in Ukraine with the Orange Revolution in 2004 and 5, and maybe like the protests that erupted just last year that we talked about on GNR in Belarus, where the president there, Lukashenko, is just barely holding on to power, and there have been massive protests in the street over election fraud. Now, the stated goal of Navalny's movement is to make Russia, quote, a more normal European country with rule of law and independent courts and free media. So Navalny just may represent, for many, the advent of a Russian spring a year or two down the road. Now, just as quick background why he's in the news today. In August 2020, he was on a flight in Russia and became very sick, so sick that the flight had to be diverted, and he was taken to a hospital and eventually flown to Berlin and treated. And the test showed, as Pat mentioned, that he'd been poisoned with a military-grade toxin, nerve toxin, and subsequent media investigations suggested that the bad guys here were a team of assassins from Russia's FSB security service. Now, Putin dismissed those accusations as a smear, saying, quote, if someone had wanted to poison him, they would have finished him off, of course, if they worked for the FSB, presumably. But Navalny spent 5 months recuperating in Germany, and he returned to Russia this past January 17th and was immediately arrested on charges that he violated the terms of that 2014 fraud conviction. He came back to Russia to rally his supporters to contest parliamentary elections, as I mentioned, that are scheduled for this September. 2 days after being back, and again, he's arrested as soon as he comes into the country, 2 days after being arrested, his people sent out a very humorous and, again, hard-hitting video documenting Putin's alleged billion-dollar mansion being constructed on the Black Sea, a mansion paid for by wealthy oligarchs who want something from Putin or have already gotten something from Putin. This mansion supposedly has vineyards and a casino and an underground hockey rink and a hookah lounge with a pole dancing stage. Navalny calls the complex the world's biggest bribe. And his video, which is complete with architectural renderings and recreations of what this is going to look like because it's under construction right now. His video has been seen by more than 90 million people, and it's gathered such attention that Putin on TV had to publicly deny the accuracy of that video a couple of days ago. Now, prompted by Navalny's call for protest since he's been arrested and prompted by the video itself, tens of thousands of Russian protesters have hit the street over the last week in over 100 Russian cities, including 40,000 protesters estimated in Moscow alone, all demonstrating against the Putin regime. And somewhere almost 4,000 of those protesters have been arrested. The Biden administration has called for Navalny's release, as did Secretary of State Pompeo before he left office, as have almost all Western European governments. Now, Navalny's team has called for more demonstrations on January 31st and February 2nd, when a court is scheduled to consider his sentencing. Now, Navalny now sits in prison, but at the end of his video, his tagline, his final words are, quote, "The future is in our hands. Do not be silent. don't agree to obey the feasting villains. And I love that phrase, the feasting villains. He took it from a Tolstoy quote. But so, Pat, that's where we are. Navalny, very interesting developments, I think, over the next several months in Russia from a political standpoint. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the Putin administration deals with Navalny in the short run.
Well, that place under construction, that sounds like Dick's residence, I
Doesn't
think.
it?
Listen, you're the one who lives downtown in that expensive apartment, not me. But huh? So that video is available on YouTube, I think, isn't it? Right?
It is.
It is. It
sure is. And I think I've watched about 30 minutes of it. I think it's a video that's like well over an hour.
Yeah.
It's a substantial video.
Well, we have a shorter clip here that shows a little bit of what's been going on over the weekend in Russia, across Russia. And Breck, if you don't mind, we'll just tee this up.
Well, no, that'd be great. I meant to mention that. Thank you very much.
Arrest after arrest after arrest. On Saturday, the detentions kept coming, more than 3,000 in all. Authorities had promised a tough response, arguing protests were not only illegal, but a public health risk due to the coronavirus. On Pushkin Square in central Moscow, demonstrators had come to demand freedom for opposition leader Alexei Navalny, just months after a poisoning attack nearly took his life. Some were demanding change after years under President Vladimir Putin.
I never seen the other president in my country, and I'm 24 and I'm kind of tired.
While others resented different forms of authority.
When I woke up, my mom and dad said, "No, Kirill, you shouldn't go there, like you shouldn't against Putin because you can't."
Navalny's not afraid, and neither am I, reads this sign. Similar rallies took place across the country, in far-off cities like Khabarovsk, Irkutsk, and Vladivostok, even as the Kremlin downplayed the size of the Saturday protests. Protesters even took to the streets in remote northern Yakutsk, where the temperature registered at minus 50 degrees Celsius.
Whoa.
The turnout suggested Navalny's anti-corruption message, fueled by social media, was reaching the nation, and younger Russians in particular, despite Kremlin efforts to label him as politically insignificant or as a Western-backed stooge. What is not clear is whether it changes Navalny's fate. The opposition leader is currently in a Moscow prison over a supposed parole violation. But he faces the possibility of a longer prison sentence on what Navalny and his supporters say are fabricated charges.
The way they took him, the way they captured him was totally against the Russian law, against our constitution and all. And if they can do it to a person like that, with millions of followers and all, they can do it to us.
Authorities launched new criminal probes against several protesters whom they say attacked police. Prison sentences may follow. The government tactic has worked in the past to tamp down on dissent at home. How effective it will be this time is a question on the minds of many. Navalny's team says demonstrations will continue as long as the opposition leader remains behind bars. Charles Maines for VOA News, Moscow.
So that's what's going on in Russia over the weekend. And this gets back, guys, to the conversation we had about American leadership and our values. With what we've witnessed here in the last month, it's difficult to go back and talk to other countries about things like these protests while we're looking at what's going on here.
Yeah, it undercuts our credibility tremendously.
Yeah.
One of the signs that often seen in these things is basically translates. It's the Один за всех, one for all and all for one. So it's, I don't know, the Three Musketeers or something.
A derivation on the E pluribus unum.
Yeah.
I see your Russian is still at your fingertips.
Well, and of course, I just want to add too, in Belarus, as we talked about last year, even though the West protested about the way the elections were run by President Lukashenko and there was massive protest and so forth, Putin did stand up pretty strongly and told everybody to back off, which they did. And with great use of police forces and the military and otherwise, Lukashenko managed to stay in power, at least to date. But I think that gives some insight into how fearful Putin may be about a Navalny-like person being able to raise those kinds of protests in Russia. He certainly came to Lukashenko's aid.
Yeah, I would beware of predictions that this is going to be an orange revolution like in Kiev or someplace. Putin's control of the mechanisms of security in the country is pretty solid. But the people coming out in the street no longer. What was the one sign? Navalny's not afraid, neither am I. So it'll be interesting to watch how this plays out.
Yep.
Busy week, lots going on in the world, even outside of our gaze in Washington, as we're looking at what's going on at Capitol Hill with the impeachment trial. New people at the State Department, as we introduced last week, and Dick talked about a little bit today. It's just we live in interesting times. Well, I don't see any questions from our friends in the audience. We did have one comment talking about where to find the countries, and it's on the ICANN website, and we'll do a quick look at that page, and a shout out to Bonnie Lee Michelson, who pointed that in our direction. And okay, so here's the ICANN website, Nobel Peace Prize winner. How is your country doing? And it's got an assessment of all the countries that have signed up for this. And
it's just Africa.
Yeah, well, this is the Africa page, and then there's Asia. These are the Asian countries.
Click on the Europe one. See if it's Australia. No, there we go. Austria. You're right, Pat. Good eye there.
Well, I'm good at jigsaw puzzles. And these are not. This is not a list of everybody who's signed. This is I guess you click on it, and this is a new website to me. So you click and see what the nuclear status is. Russia has, according to this, 6,300 nuclear weapons. Has not yet joined the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. So let's take a look at Austria. I think that's the one. Has joined. Yep.
Has joined. Okay.
North America, the United States, 5,800 nuclear weapons has not joined. So that's.
So Russia's got more weapons than we do. We ought to fix that. Make America great again. You know.
But we have bigger, stronger missiles.
Oh, ours are better. Ours are bigger. Okay.
The best in the world.
Quality, not quantity.
The best that money can buy. All right. Well, thank you, Dick and Breck, for another global news review. Well, I think these are important issues, and we will probably come back to some of the conversations we had today, especially climate change. Huh? Yes, sir. We'll be there. Breck, Dick, thanks so much. Everybody, have a good week.
Have a good week. Good to see everybody.
Adios.
Bye-bye.